So back to where we are now in Australasia. I'm obviously in England. The storm Christopher bearing down on us, but I'm going to really try and put myself and visualize myself in Australia right now. I lived there for 5 years. It's the land of wonder, the land down under, my favorite place on earth. In fact, specifically at Balmoral Beach, which is on the North Shore, a little bit before we get to the Northern Beaches, where our first speaker comes from. I also need to make you aware of that we're bringing what were the Employee Engagement Awards, now the Inspiring Workplaces Awards, back to Australasia this year. And now we have a partner down there that's going to be running it totally locally, based out of Mossman. So they're open for entries down in Australasia, and we're really glad to be back. So our very first speaker, I've known this man many years. He's seen the good, the bad, and the ugly from me. So not too many questions in Slack. But I'm going to bring him into it right now, and welcome Karl. Karl, hello. I'm going to quickly introduce you. Let me do that quick tick there. Oh, we keep unmuting. You can unmute it. I'm delighted to welcome you, Karl. Your background is in science, marketing, culture, leadership, as well as massive research into brand reputation, has led to you being published in over 60 articles and speaking engagements from TEDx, the Committee for Economic Development in Australia. There's not much you haven't done. We won't get into all of it, but from working with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which was very cool, to competing in a variety of endurance sports. But perhaps the one I'm most jealous of is, as a huge cricket fan, and well done India, is the great work you've done with the Australian cricket team. So welcome, Karl. How are you doing?
I'm well, Matt. How are you, mate?
I'm great. This is a product of its environment, rolling with the punches as we all are for the past 12 months, and very, very happy to see you. So I think without further ado, I'm going to let you do your thing.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Matt. Look, that's a very warm introduction and welcome, and I'm always it's great to kick things off. And look, congratulations to you too, Matt. I have known you for several decades now, and this is just another terrific initiative. You're very creative and very resourceful. I think this sort of thing will go a long way in helping workplaces across the globe. So, congratulations on that. I'll be sharing some of my thoughts, some of my research, and also sampling other research as we wander through the next 15 minutes or so. Because of the time restraint, I don't have enough time really to get into the referencing and the detail that I normally would from an academic sense. But every statistic that I give you is a bona fide statistic. My topic today is going to be talking around the one thing that actually fuels inspiring workplaces. It's the one thing that, it's a fairly obvious thing, but it's the thing that has driven mankind to the performance that it has, particularly in a team-based sense. So the thing that helped NASA explore the universe and space, the thing that has helped every sporting team beat the Australian cricket team in their glory days of 2000, less so at the moment, perform so well, and also the thing that's driven tech companies to grow at a rate that we've never seen before, certainly in my lifetime. And that thing, as I'm sure you'll understand and agree, is culture. Now, typically, know-it-all types like myself, when we say culture, we like to put a definition to it and make it sort of simple for people, because it's had a bad rap. It's had a bad rap, and it's also been living in foster care, in that culture has for many years been sort of delegated or relegated to HR or people and culture, when really the board, the CEO, the executive team, and everyone inside the organisation, as we know, owns culture. Now, I know we're kicking off an Inspirathon for inspiring workplaces, but my talk's going to have a little bit of a dark side to it, unfortunately. But I think it's very important to keep a sense of seriousness and validity to this concept. When we talk about culture, it's very quickly thought of as a nice to have, or something that we do around the climate and people feel good and they feel nice at work. Well, I'm here to challenge that and to talk about how important it really is. So as far as the definition goes, as I mentioned, people love to say it's the way we do things around here. That's typically the definition everyone uses. For me, it doesn't work. It's too easy to dismiss. The way we do things around here, it's too grandiose, it's too vague. So I don't use it. The other one on the other end of the spectrum in terms of a definition is it's tacit assumptions. Edgar Schein came out with some really terrific work, but said culture is the tacit assumptions that live within an organisation. For me, that's too conceptual. The first time I heard it as a professor of marketing, I still had to go and Google what tacit assumptions actually meant. So anything that's too difficult or too vague won't work as a definition. For me, the best definition that I've ever used with organisations, both professionally and academically, is expectations. Culture is the expectations that reside within an organisation. The expectations of the business, of leaders, of people, the way of working. So, for example, are there expectations that people inside the organisation fall in line? Is it rank and file? Are there expectations that people work together or they compete against one another? Or are there expectations that we have open conversations? Or the expectation, actually, we don't have open conversations and we have conversations behind people's back? We sort of build this passive-aggressive politics. So I think as we move through, when I'm talking about culture, it's important that we do sort of reflect on a definition that I'm talking about, expectations. Quick story, 2007 and 8, I did a global pilot with a big pharmaceutical company looking to change its relationship with its market because essentially doctors weren't listening to their information. The expectations of that pharmaceutical company, their culture, was that you replicate former success. So you do what happened before and they do what happened before them, and essentially that's the expectation. As we know around innovation particularly and being current, especially coming out of the last 12 months, it's not about looking back, it's about looking at the moment and forward and understanding what the future needs are and then building your experience around that. So of course that project failed, and now we're in a situation globally where medical experts, practitioners in general, don't get to talk to pharmaceutical companies because they didn't earn the right to actually sit in front of them and share information, despite, in many instances, it being valuable information. End of story. So expectations are actually critical. So expectations are communicated overtly and some of them covertly. So what's expected of you is not just what leaders will say or what's written in your psychological contract or your employment contract, it's observations. As a species or as any sort of animal life form, when we jump into a group of something else like us, we look to the leader and emulate their behaviour, and their behaviour sets expectations. So, and that also moves all the way through to ways of working. So lesson one, when we're talking about inspiring workplaces, for me, it's mind-boggling that organisations, be it big or small, and we work with enormous multi-billion-dollar organisations and multi-million-dollar projects, haven't invested in culture effectively because it's the one thing that actually matters. It's the one thing that determines success. It's the one thing that leaders need to attend to every minute of every day, and it's the only thing they need to be on the ball with 24/7. So I think this idea of it being in foster care and being relegated to people and culture or HR is a real problem. I think boards, certainly we're working with boards in Australia and executive teams here to pick the reins up and take control of that and not see it as something that's a nice to have. Matt, I know you're in charge of time and I'm doing my best to stay within the time limit, but shout, interrupt, do whatever we need to if I go over. Let's get into something more recent, 2020. Let's look at some of the facts, and this is going to take a very dark turn. So some of the facts coming out, and there's a variety of statistics that came out of last year because it was an interesting and amazing year from an academic sense, and also tragic for many other reasons. But essentially, a lot of the trends suggest that 90% of businesses have seen a positive impact from work from home. Better work-life balance, greater authenticity, less stress in general. The big point here is that that's only for some companies and for some people based on their particular situation. That's not the case for all. And so it's important that we don't look at one size fits all. Similarly with culture or expectations, the idea of monoculture, we all have one culture inside an organisation, has always been false. It's always been a problem. There are multiple subcultures that make up any culture. And now work from home means that there's actually millions of subcultures based on what your work-home life looks like. So 2020, that's not actually the story. Let's look at the dark truth. So when you hear about 2020 being good for people, let's actually just make sure we're grounding that kite to something that's reality. And that is every 40 seconds across the globe, someone commits suicide. Someone takes their life every 40 seconds. And in Western society, one of the leading trends of suicide is workplace stress. So everything I just said about culture and the expectations that put on people, there's actually a real world reality to getting that right. There's a governance component here that it's not just a nice to have. There are implications that are very severe if you get it wrong. If you think about the statistic that since 1999, workplace-based suicide has increased 30% and it's rising. So there's a huge responsibility here around culture and building an inspiring workplace. It's making sure that you're not creating a pervasive impact on people's lives so much so they can't actually stand it. Now, if you think about the 20,000 or 30,000 families, countless friends that are suffering from each one of those incidents, it's enormous. So there's an incredible imperative here, not just from a feel-good, let's make this work sense, but let's actually look after one another. Let's understand there's a significant real-world health problem that we can attend to if we build an inspiring workplace. So it's not a nice to have, it's not optional, it's actually a moral necessity. As far as I'm concerned, building an inspiring workplace is a moral necessity. There's a real seriousness to it. And that's before we even talk about how beneficial that is for performance. So interesting, through COVID, we did see some predictable patterns, and some of those patterns were richer countries and richer workplace environments performed better. So mental health was generally better. We saw the trend across 2020 move from this concept of everyone pulling together through a sort of a novelty crisis, and then the longer the crisis continued and the pandemic went on, the worse the statistics started showing up. So you started to see increased mental health issues, increased suicide in poorer countries like Japan or Peru, for instance. So look, the lesson 2, inspiring workplaces are a necessity at an absolute minimum. There's more diversity now because people are working from home. The way that people lead people from now such a dispersed workforce is very different. No one's really trained to do that, so some are doing better than others. Individuals themselves are taking this very differently. Some are introverts, some are extroverts, some live with their family in a 6-bedroom home, some are sharing a 4-bedroom apartment. So it's really important that we've got an incredible area of diversity, and in terms of leadership across this time, understanding that we now have, and COVID has opened up millions of micro workplaces is an incredible realization and something that needs to be top of mind. As we move on into something that's a little bit lighter and sort of the way out, there's a particular quote that I quite like coming from Star Wars, which is, your focus determines your reality. And the focus of culture through 2020 has now changed forever. So we had this focus on culture. I've worked in 2 decades in culture across big organizations. Culture of labeling culture. We're going to be a high-performance culture. We're going to be a one-team culture. We're going to be customer-centric culture. Forget it. The only culture that matters right now is innovation culture. How can I shift, adapt, pivot effectively? Do we have a culture that enables us to do that? And all of the other labels that I gave you before actually run interference with achieving an innovation culture. High-performing culture is too competitive. One-team culture, you're protecting relationships a lot of the time. Customer-centric culture, you're too in the moment. So an innovative culture is actually the holy grail right now, and that's what every organisation is aspiring to. And in fact, you know what? Last year, I'd suggest that a lot of organisations were found out. They found that they were either ready to shift and pivot and rapidly transform, and they found that they were actually up against it. And so those companies that were more innovative and had that culture and the expectations of change being a norm performed much better than those that were either replicating the past or stuck in a sense of order or safety, which is a lot of the large organisations right now. So what does it take? Finally, what does it take to create and sustain an innovative culture? Look, for the answers, there's many ways to look at this. You can move into an academic sense and move through all the big universities and research centres to try and find an answer. For me, I look to the heavens. In fact, I look beyond the heavens into a galaxy far, far away, which is Star Wars. And I do find Star Wars to be an incredible reference, not just because it's fun, but it actually helps make sense of quite difficult, complex academic concepts. So in this particular instance, I think the heroes of the day in terms of cultural, who set expectations well, are of course the Rebel Alliance. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Star Wars, firstly, you should be just grossly ashamed of yourself. For those that don't know, Star Wars is essentially a classic good versus evil The Rebel Alliance are the good guys. They're sort of like Burning Man hippies that all sort of strive for peace and well-being. There's a little bit of brothers kissing sisters in there, which is a bit too much for my sort of bit too flowers in the attic for my 7-year-old. But if you move through that, they're a very well-meaning bunch. The Galactic Empire being their enemy, of course, they are evil bastards hell-bent on literally squeezing the life out of people to establish order. Now, what I just said there is actually very important, and it probably sounds very familiar to you. Establishing order. What do we know that is all about establishing order? The financial sector, Wall Street, sort of drove that sort of culture. The entire Industrial Revolution was based on establishing order. So corporate America, Japan, Australia, and the UK were all, and are actually still in some pockets, still hell-bent on creating order. What dies when order dominates culture? Innovation. Innovation dies. If you're looking for process and order as your key style or key cultural tenet, you are going to suffer from an innovation perspective. There's discipline around innovation, but too much order actually puts sand in the gearbox. So in the last few minutes that I've had, in 2020, in my view anyway, to put it into Star Wars terms, the Galactic Empire sort of pre-2020 ruled corporate culture and Western civilization. 2020 was the year that the Rebel Alliance emerged and the Empire sort of fell. Rapid experimentation, mobilization, fluid strategy, flatline authority, trust, empathy, and consideration all came to the surface. And some of those elements that we recognized, noticed, and became everyday cultural elements really should be fueled as we move forward, regardless of what the future looks like. It's a more humane, more contemplative way of operating. So rapid maturity across innovation happened last year. And as I mentioned, many were found out. Finally, the one big reality here is that you can't have an innovative company without having a learning culture. Now, in learning culture, changing any culture is hard, but actually changing it from a culture of order or safety mitigation or high performance without innovation is really difficult. So organizations now are trying to quickly sort of tool up and either recruit or hire or build frameworks or borrow frameworks from organizations that have proven that they can do it. So I just thought, finally, I'll give you sort of my view on the 7 elements of learning cultures or organizations that need to sort of shift to be more innovative. And this is what we do sort of day in, day out. And the first one is trust. And we could talk for 20 minutes on each of these, but essentially a two-way trust and a belief is critical. Flat leadership, so less authoritarian dictator-style leadership. Shared responsibility. With shared responsibility comes increased accountability. Fifth one is curiosity and expectation is expected. It's not a novelty. For a long time, people were doing hack days. And let's do an exploration here or a project. In an innovative culture, it's an expectation that you are forever exploring. You're curious. You're uncovering things to try and find new and better ways. You're rapid prototyping. You're failing and learning from those mistakes and then moving forward. So that idea of accepting failure accepting failure, but being intolerant of incompetence. And look, the last one is the current behind an innovative culture. If you think about where you've learned your best material or things that you actually haven't learned, that is probably the best example, I should say, is school. I can't remember anything that happened at school. Now, that was a long time ago for me, but it doesn't matter. It was more the mode of learning wasn't actually conducive to retaining information. So there's a current of fun and inspiration that's required for a company to move to become an innovative organization. So when we look at fun and innovation, it's very difficult if you've got an order-based, authoritarian, safety-based culture to recognize that innovation and exploration is not just an idea or something fun for us to do. It's actually critical for the performance of the organization, and it's fueled by pleasure. We learn best when we're enjoying ourselves. So for this year and then moving forward, for every foreseeable year, the focus has to be on building a learning culture through building an inspiring, enjoyable workplace. Essentially, work is part of life, and it's really important for all leaders, particularly boards and executive teams, to recognise that life's meant to be enjoyed. I've mentioned here, not just from a performance perspective, but also there's real world dark consequences for not moving on this at the moment. Thanks, Matt.
Hello, thank you. So, two questions. First one off the bat is, what Star Wars character would you be?
I really would like to think that I'm Han Solo, but I just think I'm really trying. I'm reaching with that.
Yeah, no, well, I just knew you were going to say Han.
Yeah.
But a serious question, though. How do we, first step to trying to change your culture? It's like one of the hardest things to identify and move to the innovation culture you're talking about. What would be your one step?
Well, the first thing is holding the mirror up. It doesn't matter what device you use or what diagnostic. You've got to get clear on what are the driving expectations currently. What are we currently doing? And there's ways to do that. I mean, there's lots of diagnostic tools, but essentially even simple ways of doing it. What are our behavior symbols and systems? What are the leadership behaviors? How do we communicate? What are the symbols of what matters here, which is essentially where we're spending our time and money? And then what are the systems or ways of working that basically provide you with a clear indication of what actually matters here? That's the first thing to do.
Do you think we've become more unified globally? Like, there's so many different cultural differences that we should celebrate, but we've all gone through a very similar experience in most parts of the world. Are we going to come out having more of a similar approach to these things, do you think?
I think there's a difference between an academic goal of building innovative culture and sort of this humanitarian mind shift that has been a real positive element for us. So my hope and belief is that we're more contemplative, we're more considerate of one another and everyone's individual circumstances as a result of this. I thought we were very selfish, very greedy, very myopic before this happened.
I've just got to show you a comment actually from our chairman saying, great presentation. The best way out of the crisis is to adapt by using employee ideas. What do you think of my old man's comment there?
There's nothing better. I mean, that's the reality is when you look at any diagnostic, you should have a quant component to it, and then there'll be a qual element, and the qual element provides you with all the information that you need. Now, what do your people actually need? There needs to be a strategic lens over the top of it, but they're going to tell you if they're not happy or they're not inspired, you're not getting the best out of them.
And who knows your business better than your people?
For sure.
I realise the lighting is making me look even whiter than I usually am here as well. So,
possible?
I didn't think so until right now. Look, Karl, anything else you'd like to add? It's a big responsibility kicking off the 24-hour event. It's an honour for us to have you. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Impart any more wisdom before I let you go and enjoy the rest of your day?
No, look, firstly, I want to thank you for the opportunity. I think you are doing great things. This is a really good initiative. The more we can help people move into a more considerate mindset in any which way, the better. And building an inspiring workplace is the first step in that. So no, really just thank you for the opportunity. And I think, you keep belting through. You've got many hours ahead of you. And being the endurance athlete that you are, you'll be laughing.
Yes, thank you very much. Take care, Karl. Have a fantastic 2021. And I really hope, I did have flights to Sydney for July. They were cancelled by British Airways. So I am trying to get back there. Hopefully the world will let me sooner rather than later. So take care. Say that to Danny for me and look after yourself. Bye-bye.